Greetings, and welcome to Cyber Focus, your source for international business information. I'm your host, Ryan Craven, and our guest today is Bob Mason. Bob is the Vice President and Export Sales Manager for the International Division of Ford MeterBox. Bob holds a degree from Indiana University with a concentration in Japanese. Following a year abroad at Nanzan University in Nagoya, Japan, he joined the Indiana Department of Commerce in 1988, coordinating the attraction of Japanese investment. Bob later served as the Deputy Director of the State of Indiana Japan office in Tokyo, assisting Indiana companies looking to export in Japan. In 1994, Bob joined the Ford MeterBox company. Ford MeterBox is a 122-year-old, privately held, Indiana-based manufacturer in Wabash, Indiana. They produce over 30,000 different products for the water distribution industry. As an international sales manager for Asia, Bob developed markets throughout Asia and Oceania. He now serves as a board director, vice president, and international sales manager, supervising the company's international market development in over 65 countries. Bob, thanks for being here today. All right, Bob. Again, thanks for joining us today.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about Ford MeterBox. Kind of what do you all do, and yeah.
Sure. Well, Ford MeterBox, our headquarters is located in Wabash, Indiana. We also have a factory down in Pell City, Alabama. That's about a 10-hour drive from here. But the company was started in 1898 and has been in this region, its beginnings. But the company is primarily targeted towards the water industry. We currently make 30,000 different products for waterworks distribution, which would include brass valves, brass fittings, meter pits, which is something you'd probably find in colder climates in your areas that keeps meters from freezing. We make equipment for repairing pipe down in our Pell City, Alabama factory. We also make equipment that keeps pipes from separating. So when you get water changing directions in a municipal water system, the pipes want to come apart. And so we have a vast array of products for keeping those pipe joints together underground when the pipes are under pressure. The company started back in 1898 when most people didn't meter their water. And what would happen was to keep your perishables from going bad, people would run cold water over those products, over the food, and they didn't care about how much water was running over the food. And water systems were running out of water. And so our founder came up with and I would add to that, most people didn't want to put water meters inside the house, and that water meters were coming out at that time. You didn't want a meter reader coming in your house every time they were reading the meter. So he devised a system to be able to keep the meter outside the home, but easy enough for the meter reader to read. Now, here in Indiana, the temperatures in the winter are very cold. And so in cold climates, you bury the lines much deeper to keep them from freezing. And so he devised what we call a pit setter, and that's something that keeps the meter to eye level, so a meter reader could easily open the lid to the meter box and read the meter, yet keep the meter from freezing, and using convection heat, keeping that water meter running all the time. And so he started from that, and by word of mouth, started selling other utilities in the area, and that was the beginnings of Ford MeterBox. Since that time, we've expanded into brass. We actually maintain one of the largest brass foundries in the world for waterworks brass here in Wabash, Indiana. And then went into the pipe repair products that we talked about earlier down in our Pell City factory. And then in 1994 was our latest acquisition, where we bought the company that makes pipe restraints and have put that into our product mix. We currently export our products to 60 countries around the world. We're exporting, of course, to Canada and Mexico. We export down to Central America and South America, do a lot of work in the Caribbean. We do work in Asia, particularly Japan, Korea. We've done a lot of work in Vietnam. We do Australia, and we have sold in parts of Europe over the years. We maintain a staff in Canada. We have 3 company salesmen that work out of their homes that cover Canada. We also have an individual out of Brisbane, Australia, that works part-time for us and covers Oceania, the Oceania region for us. And then we have an individual that we brought on a couple of years ago who is operating out of Costa Rica, and he covers Mexico and Central America for us. So in a nutshell, that's what our company looks like today. We make over 30,000 different products for the waterworks industry.
Oh, fantastic. I have to ask, how does a small, manufacturer, in rural, Wabash, Indiana, kind of get into the export world?
Well, it's almost, you have to export to keep current on specifications around the world. We're so used to here in the United States turning on the water and knowing that the tap is going to run. In many countries, water doesn't run 24 hours a day. It may run a few hours a day for you to fill up your tank. It may be an area that doesn't even have a water system. And so the opportunities in the United States where we've been active, you kind of outgrow yourself after a while and need to expand into other markets. So that's kind of what got us into export, is the ability to see other ways of putting in water systems that are not the same as what's done in the United States. For example, in Europe, the way of tapping a pipe is quite different than the way we do it here in the United States. It's a different piece of equipment, and we actually have started making a British style tapping ferrule, is what they're called. Allows you to tap a pipe. And because the British have influence in areas like the Caribbean or other parts of the world, they've adopted the British style specifications. And so that's allowed us to expand into those markets and meeting the specifications that they're used to doing. We've learned a lot too. A lot of equipment that we haven't used in the United States before, we've been able to adapt it and bring it to the United States. For example, the pipe restraint we were talking about earlier was actually invented in Japan, because there's a lot of earth movement with earthquakes, and that didn't exist in the United States. They would use these huge concrete truss blocks to keep pipes from coming apart. And in the 70s and 80s, the technology that Japan was developing was slowly coming into the United States. And so that technology was adopted from Japan. There are many other products that don't exist in the United States today that we see out in foreign markets. And so it allows us to have a much larger perspective when exporting your products to other countries. You're learning things that you can actually bring home. The other side is economically, the economies for the export world kind of work inverse with what's happening in the United States. So when the economies in the U.S. are going well, typically it might be a little bit more challenging for us to export if it's a strong dollar, as has been in recent past. But when the United States, the economy here is a bit challenging, we find that the export markets actually work in our favor. And so it's allowed us to kind of diversify our business by being able to export.
And we've talked before this too, and with some other folks that why is it important for folks to get into and companies to get into exporting? And you nailed the one that seems obvious, is that diversification and strategic planners, they always talk about that.
Sure.
A point that you highlighted that I thought was interesting was the seeing how other companies in other industries and other countries operate. What do you need to develop to help them out, and being able to bring that knowledge back to what you're doing currently.
Well, what's interesting too is in the United States, we've developed no lead brass. Lead in the waterworks industry, a lot of service lines today that exist in older homes were lead pipes. And so that's caused a lot of concern that we need to get. Lead in the water is never a good thing. And so there's a lot of concern that we need to change some of the products we offer. And for example, plumbing fixtures in houses are now lead-free. And the same with distribution equipment. Brass used to have 5% lead in it, and now it's the amount of lead is reduced. Well, Japan was 10 years ahead of us. Japan had already developed alloys and developed techniques to machine lead-free products, because it's much different to machine than it is regular leaded products. And so we had partnerships in Japan. We actually sell through our competition in Japan. Our brass competitor in Japan sells our line of products, the repair clamps out of Alabama. They put that in their distribution network for us. But they also shared a lot of information for us on how to go about machining this new type of alloy, this new brass alloy. So there's a lot of great things that can come out of partnerships too. When you export, you learn a lot about things that you didn't know about.
Yeah, absolutely. That can be said for travel and
Yep.
and all those things. Speaking of which, Ford Meterbox has a separate export department from the domestic sales. And what why is that, and what are some of those talents that team needs in order to be effective in that global marketplace?
Sure. One of the brilliant things that the people before me that ran the company thought about was, we are truly an American company. But to operate in the international world, you're going to have to adapt to the cultures, to the way of doing business of other countries. If we treated some of our international customers the way we do business in the United States, we wouldn't get very far at all. And so the export department was developed to be a buffer from a U.S. company and yet be able to adapt to the various international markets that we serve. In particular, I've got a staff here that several are native or fluent in Spanish. And there's a huge market for us in Central America, South America, parts of the Caribbean that speak Spanish. And having a staff that can communicate in their native language puts us far ahead of many of our competitors. And just to give you an example, if you were to pick up the phone and call a foreign manufacturer and not be able to speak in your native language, there's some apprehension there. First of all, there's details of maybe some technical products, but you feel more comfortable talking to someone in your native language rather than being required to talk in a foreign language. And that's what we have done in the export department, is we make it comfortable for the customer to not worry and be able to do business in the language that they do the best we can. We've got speakers of Portuguese, Spanish. Two of us have backgrounds in Japanese. We've had Arabic speakers before. So having an export department that specializes in the various areas of the world that we sell is a huge advantage, I think, when we're competing against the international community or international competition. The other thing to remember is payment terms in the United States are going to be completely different in payment terms around the world. Here we're used to 30 days or 60 days. When you get in the international markets, they're used, some areas, 120 days is very common for them, 90 days. Letters of credit, different ways of paying your customer are completely different than what we're used to here in the United States. Credit checks are a completely different way or different strategy of figuring out if your customer can pay their bills, or do you need to insure your receivables? There's a whole array of things that you need to take into consideration when you get into international markets. And by having an export department separate from our domestic sales department allows us to have individuals that are skilled or trained in the various barriers we're going to see in international markets.
And you mentioned something as simple as the payment terms. If you are operating your business expecting, hey, I know 80% of my customers and sales are going to pay me within 30 days, and
Yes.
you take that mindset abroad without having that awareness, that can really throw off your numbers.
Well, and also currency. For years, we sold into the Canadian market in U.S. dollars. We now sell in Canadian dollars. Let me give you an example. Many bids take some time to be evaluated and to be awarded. So let's say you're a public tender, and you're a company that's going to bid on this public tender. So you come to me and you ask for a bid on some products, and I quote them to you in U.S. dollars. And today the U.S. dollar is worth 140 Canadian dollars, or 1.4 Canadian dollars. And now when the bid takes place, it's evaluated. And so we may be 3 months, we may be 4 or 5 months down the road. And the change in that currency rate could greatly affect you on your profit margin or what profits you had built in there. It could be better, but as fate would have it, usually it goes the other direction. And so this allows you to, by selling in the currency of our customer, we took on that risk. And many of them are distributors who aren't involved in currency markets. They've been playing the currency markets only because they had to. Now we've made it easy for them. They don't have to worry about that part of it. Our team here, who is versed in international currencies, can handle that part for them. So that also are some things that we had to take into consideration.
Yeah, so that ends up being having not only folks with the international experience, but also the currency piece of it, which is confusing enough for most of us.
Exactly.
Turns out to be a fairly competitive advantage for you, making it easier for your clients.
Exactly. Yes.
Great. One of the things that we had talked about before was the value of having a fluent native language speaker. They can understand your technical terms and be able to explain those, and it's a lot of it's just even things like dialect and accents and all of that. So having those people on your team, again, turns out to be a huge competitive advantage for you, right?
It's a big advantage. And it's not just the language. It's also understanding the culture. When we bring someone on our sales team and they're going to be dealing in specific markets, we want to make sure that they know the cultural differences. You almost have to have chameleons on staff, because if they're handling a region, Saudi Arabia is completely different than Yemen, or Saudi Arabia is completely different than how things are done in the UAE. And you have to know those subtle differences to be able to communicate well. It's for example, something as simple as Canada. Many Americans feel that Canadians are just extension of the United States, and nothing is further from the truth. There is a definite cultural difference between the two countries. They both have great points. They both have points that we don't agree with. And if you understand those subtleties, if you understand the different cultures and be able to operate in that culture, it certainly gives you a hand up when you're in negotiations or you're trying to make inroads into that country. Knowledge of the culture is just as much. But yeah, with language too, you are correct. There are, for example, Quebec French is completely different than French from France, and you just have to know the ins and outs of the different areas that might speak a different dialect. We joke because we have people in the office here. We have a gentleman originally from Colombia. We have someone from Guatemala. We have someone from Puerto Rico. We have a guy that trained in Spain. And of course, all the different dialects and ways of speaking Spanish are completely different. And they're constantly joking with each other about who actually has the better accent. And so it is good to have a staff that at a minimum is culturally sensitive. And I will think of an incident that we had some gentlemen from the Middle East that went to lunch with us, and they were serving split pea soup and didn't think anything of it. And the person I was working for at the time leaned over to the server and said, "Is there ham in this soup?" Because we wouldn't think it's cooked oftentimes with a ham bone or with anything with pork in it, which, as you know, would have been disastrous for a Muslim to partake in that. And so those little subtleties can make a big difference in working with customers like that.
Absolutely. And correct me if I'm wrong, but don't you all do some programs, initiatives, and activities to help kind of develop those skills kind of in the local area, and just, hey, what are these things that can help you succeed in business and future?
Yeah, we have a diverse group here. We typically won't hire someone just out of college. We'll have someone who has lived overseas, has experience in the different cultures, particularly when we assign them to a region. Usually it's a region that they spent a lot of time in and know the ins and outs of it. So there's product training, and there might be, there's also a cultural training of your own company, because each company has their own culture. But I do a lot of training in the subtleties of approaches that we use, because learning sales internationally is completely different than doing sales in the United States. We tend to be more direct. In many countries, whoever speaks first is going to lose in negotiations. Silence is used quite often. I'm particularly have some experience in Japan, and there are often times when you're sitting in a meeting and there's complete silence for several seconds. And as an American, people get nervous because they feel they have to be filling in the voids, and that's a natural silence is used to be taking in of what has just been said, and so you have to learn how to deal with that. So I think more, because we hire people with experience in the different areas that they're going to be representing us, I think I spend more time on training in sales, international sales, and how to make their approach than I have to do in the cultural side of things.
Well, and that makes sense as well. And, I appreciate, sharing that experience and what you look for in that candidate. international sales and whatnot is something, or just international exposure period,
Sure.
it behooves a student or intern or whoever to actively look out for those opportunities to gain that experience.
Yes, very much so.
Awesome. Well, I think that answers the majority of the questions I had for you today,
Okay.
Bob. I think you did a great job of highlighting some of those points and really the value of exporting and what it takes to get to that point, but also to succeed in that point.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
yeah, thanks again for your time, and best of luck with everything.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
That's it for this edition of Cyber Focus. Future comments or suggestions, please send us a note at cyber@indiana.edu.